Imagine living in a world where power is everything, a world where your royal bloodline is your only true value, and preserving that bloodline becomes more important than anything. So important that families turn to the most taboo and grotesque solution: marrying their own siblings. This isn't some dark fairy tale. It's the twisted reality of some of the world's most powerful families. Imagine an emperor so obsessed with maintaining the purity of his bloodline that he wed his own sister, dooming not just his empire, but his own descendants to a fate marked by deformities, madness, and eventual ruin. For centuries, royal families from ancient Egypt to Europe resorted to sibling marriages, believing that keeping the bloodline pure would secure their power. But what came from these marriages wasn't power. It was sickness, mental instability, and eventual collapse. The Ptolemies, with their infamous marriages, and the Habsburgs, with their family tree twisted by generations of incest, both faced unimaginable consequences from their pursuit of purity. Tonight, we take you through the most disturbing royal marriages in history, where the thirst for power and the obsession with bloodlines didn't just shape empires, it destroyed them. Join us as we unravel the dark legacy of incest in royal families and the terrible cost of their obsession with purity. Royal incest wasn't just a bizarre anomaly. It was a strategic decision, rooted in power and the belief that purity of bloodlines was essential for maintaining control. In ancient Egypt, particularly during the Ptolemaic dynasty, sibling marriages were not just a tradition but a divine mandate. Pharaohs like Cleopatra VII, Ptolemy XIII, and Ptolemy XIV were married to their brothers, believing that maintaining a pure royal bloodline was essential for securing divine rule. To them, royal blood was sacred, a direct link to the gods, and it could only be kept pure by marrying within the family. For Cleopatra, her marriage to her brothers was as much a political maneuver as it was a religious one. She believed that keeping her bloodline uncontaminated by foreign influence would solidify her power and divine right to rule. But the practice of marrying siblings for generations led to horrific consequences. Over time, the Ptolemaic family's bloodline became so inbred that it caused genetic mutations, physical deformities, and mental instability. The toll this took on Cleopatra's dynasty was devastating, and the health issues caused by their incestuous marriages ultimately played a role in the fall of their empire. In the pursuit of maintaining divine purity, the Ptolemies unknowingly sealed their fate, setting the stage for a tragic legacy of suffering and collapse. The Habsburg dynasty is one of Europe's most infamous examples of royal incest, where the need for power and control led to generations of inbreeding. For centuries, the Habsburgs maintained their vast empire by keeping marriages within the family, believing that consolidating power through blood would ensure their dominance. But what was intended as a strategic move to solidify royal authority ended up being their undoing. One of the most tragic and horrifying consequences of this practice was the reign of Charles II of Spain, one of the last Habsburg monarchs. Charles was the product of multiple generations of incestuous marriages, and the toll on his body and mind was devastating. His appearance was grotesque. He suffered from the infamous Habsburg jaw, a massive underbite that caused him extreme difficulty in eating and speaking. His physical deformities were only a small part of the nightmare. Mentally, he was severely impaired, unable to speak fluently or understand basic concepts, making him a puppet ruler who struggled to govern his empire. Charles also faced countless health issues, including a weakened immune system and frequent illnesses. His inability to produce a viable heir was a devastating blow to the Habsburg dynasty. For all their inbreeding and consolidation of power, they had no one to carry on their legacy. The genetic degeneration caused by years of sibling marriages left the family unable to continue their rule. Charles's death without a successor marked the end of the Habsburg Empire in Spain, signaling the collapse of a once mighty dynasty. The Habsburgs' obsession with maintaining their bloodline had, in the end, crippled them. Their royal blood had become a toxic force, a legacy of inbreeding that ultimately doomed their rule. This serves as a chilling reminder that the pursuit of political power and familial purity can destroy not just a dynasty, but the very people who sought to preserve it. Cleopatra, one of the most brilliant and politically astute rulers in history, found herself bound by a grim and inescapable cycle: sibling marriages. Born into the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra was not just a ruler, but a product of generations of incestuous unions designed to preserve the bloodline and maintain power. The Ptolemies, ruling Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, practiced these sibling marriages as a means of consolidating their control and ensuring their divine right to rule. For Cleopatra, her marriages to her brothers, Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV, were not romantic. Rather, they were strategic necessities. Though their impact would prove disastrous for her family, her first marriage to Ptolemy XIII was a political move, cementing her position as co-ruler of Egypt, but it also trapped her in a toxic relationship fueled by inbreeding. As the product of incest, her brother was increasingly unstable, mentally and physically, and their rivalry eventually led to a brutal power struggle. The royal court became a hotbed of intrigue, where Cleopatra manipulated her position with intelligence and cunning. However, her ability to maneuver politically couldn't change the toxic legacy of her family's bloodline, which led to mental instability, paranoia, and a slow decline in their health. In a final attempt to preserve the throne, Cleopatra's next marriage was to her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. Like his older sibling, Ptolemy XIV was mentally compromised by the family's incestuous practices. His reign was little more than a puppet show, with Cleopatra pulling the strings. Despite her intelligence, Cleopatra was caught in the destructive web of her own family's genetic decay, and her marriage to her brothers only deepened the damage. While Cleopatra's rule was marked by political brilliance and the strength of her alliances, most notably with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, her family's inbreeding left a lasting scar on Egypt's future. Ptolemy's inability to produce healthy heirs led to the eventual fall of the dynasty and Egypt's annexation by Rome in 30 BC. Cleopatra's tragic legacy, though powerful and fascinating, was inevitably shaped by the same incestuous traditions that brought about the collapse of her house. The genetic damage inflicted upon the Ptolemies, as well as the psychological strain it placed on their rulers, culminated in the tragic end of one of the greatest dynasties in history. The Roman Empire, one of the most powerful civilizations in history, was also plagued by its own internal decay, with the imperial bloodline often intertwined with the darkest aspects of human nature. The ruling families of Rome, particularly the Julio-Claudian dynasty, were notorious for their incestuous alliances. While not always involving direct sibling marriages, the practice of marrying within close family lines was used as a political tool to solidify power and ensure the continuation of the bloodline. Emperor Claudius, for example, married his niece, Agrippina the Younger, in an attempt to secure his reign and further the ambitions of his family. Such marriages were not out of love or necessity, but were steeped in the notion that keeping the bloodline pure was the key to maintaining imperial authority. But it was Caligula, the mad emperor, who brought incest to a new, horrifying level. His reign, already marked by cruelty, extravagance, and sexual perversions, became notorious for his sexual relationship with his sister, Drusilla. Caligula's obsession with consolidating power and furthering his own hedonistic desires led him to cross boundaries that shocked even the Roman world. It's said that Caligula's incestuous behavior wasn't just about pleasure, but about claiming dominion over his family and the empire. His marriage to his sisters, and his treatment of Drusilla were seen as both a symbol of his absolute power and his utter disregard for the moral boundaries that usually governed Roman society. The consequences of Caligula's incestuous relationships were devastating. His unchecked behavior destabilized his reign, as many in the Senate and the Roman elite began to see his actions as a threat to the empire. His relationship with Drusilla, which went beyond familial duty, was seen as a reflection of his madness and disregard for the Roman moral code. Caligula's incestuous actions, combined with his general cruelty and tyranny, led to widespread fear and resentment among the Roman people and elites. This, ultimately, culminated in his assassination in 41 AD, orchestrated by members of his own inner circle, marking the end of his chaotic reign. The assassination also marked the beginning of the decline of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which had been tarnished by the insanity and inbreeding that defined much of its rule. The incestuous nature of Caligula's reign, and the way it destabilized the empire, serves as a chilling reminder of how family power struggles, combined with corruption and madness, can destroy even the mightiest of empires. The practice of incestuous marriages wasn't exclusive to the ancient or early Roman empires. It continued to plague royal families well into the medieval era, particularly within the Byzantine Empire and other medieval European monarchies. Incest was not just a twisted form of keeping the bloodline pure, but also a calculated political strategy. The idea was that keeping the throne within the family, through incestuous marriages, would prevent the division of power and ensure the continuity of dynastic control. However, this practice, driven by both tradition and necessity, resulted in disastrous consequences. In the Byzantine Empire, several emperors married close relatives, including nieces and nephews, often to consolidate power within the imperial family. One notorious case involved Emperor Justinian II, who married his own niece, the daughter of his sister. These royal unions were designed to eliminate rivals within the family, preserving the throne for the offspring of these incestuous unions. However, the results were far from the intended outcome. Such marriages led to serious health problems, both physical and mental. The inbreeding caused severe deformities in royal offspring, including genetic mutations that affected the ability to rule. These unfortunate heirs were often unable to assume power, further destabilizing the empire. The resulting physical deformities, whether in the form of malformed bodies, crippled limbs, or mental instability, also contributed to the dynastic downfall, making it difficult for these families to produce strong, capable rulers. Additionally, the dynastic instability created by these marriages often led to infighting and brutal power struggles within the family. Weak heirs and unstable rulers were unable to secure their thrones, leading to a breakdown of authority. Political rivalries festered within the royal houses, and the struggles for power led to rebellions, coups, and even the eventual collapse of once great royal families. The history of royal incest in medieval Europe and Byzantium is not just a story of physical decay. It's also a tale of the corruption of political systems, where the pursuit of power within the family led to the empire's slow destruction. The psychological consequences of incestuous marriages in royal families were equally as devastating as the physical toll. While many of the royal families believed that keeping the bloodline pure would preserve their power, the reality was far darker. The children born from these incestuous unions were not only plagued by physical deformities, but often suffered from severe mental health issues as well. Inbreeding caused genetic mutations that impaired cognitive and emotional development, creating a generation of rulers who were mentally unstable and unfit to govern. Records from various royal dynasties, especially in medieval Europe and the Byzantine Empire, indicate that many inbred royals exhibited signs of mental instability. From depression and delusions to irrational behavior and outbursts of violence, the psychological toll was significant. The children born to incestuous marriages often found it difficult to function in society, let alone rule a kingdom. Their ability to make rational decisions was compromised, and their emotional instability caused turmoil within the royal court and beyond. One of the most tragic consequences of inbreeding in royal families was the inability to rule effectively. These royals, whose bloodlines were believed to grant them divine authority, were instead plagued by mental illnesses that made them unfit to lead. They struggled with basic decision-making and often displayed erratic behavior that made them vulnerable to manipulation by advisors or rivals. The failure of these rulers to govern properly, combined with the political infighting caused by their unstable leadership, ultimately led to the downfall of dynasties. The tragic toll of inbreeding didn't just diminish royal bloodlines, it destroyed them, leaving behind a legacy of weak and unstable rulers who could not fulfill their roles as leaders. The instability created by these psychological and physical impairments weakened entire kingdoms, creating opportunities for rivals to rise and seize power. Ultimately, the psychological consequences of incestuous royal marriages are a stark reminder of how the desire for power and control can lead to ruin, not just for families, but for entire nations. Royal incest, though often viewed as a political necessity in the eyes of the ruling elite, left a profound and tragic mark on history. The desire to keep bloodlines pure in order to maintain political power resulted in generations of inbred heirs who were physically and mentally compromised. While these practices were once accepted as a necessary evil to protect the throne, their long-lasting consequences have come to haunt history and the perception of royal power. The modern reflection on these incestuous practices is starkly different. With the advent of genetic science, the dangers of inbreeding have been thoroughly understood. Genetic studies reveal the catastrophic effects of incestuous unions, from birth defects and genetic diseases to mental health disorders and physical disabilities. What was once considered a means to preserve the purity of royal bloodlines is now seen as a reckless, harmful practice with irreversible consequences. The genetic toll caused by centuries of incest is one of the clearest examples of how ignorance, power, and fear can merge to produce horrifying outcomes. As modern society has progressed, human rights movements and ethical standards have denounced the idea of incest as not only dangerous, but morally reprehensible. The historical accounts of royal incest serve as reminders of how fear of losing power or influence led families to engage in practices that endangered their own progeny. These royal families, from the Ptolemies to the Habsburgs, have left a legacy of failure, broken bodies, and ruined empires. The study of royal incest and its consequences is not just about uncovering dark chapters of history. It's a powerful lesson on the dangers of absolute power, the desire for control, and the fear of losing status. It reflects how monarchs, driven by paranoia and obsession with dynastic purity, led their families and kingdoms to collapse. Their incestuous unions were a symbol of a system that, instead of fostering strength, bred instability and weakness. Today, the practice is condemned as a grotesque and harmful legacy that serves as a cautionary tale for the future. In the end, the legacy of royal incest stands as a warning. It is a reminder of how unchecked power can blind individuals to the ethical and moral responsibilities they owe not only to their people, but to their own families. What was once considered a tool for securing royal power became the very thing that led to its downfall. The horrors of inbreeding in royal families continue to be studied and discussed, not only for their historical significance, but as an example of the dangers inherent in placing power above all else. The dark history of royal incest is a chilling reminder of how the pursuit of power can warp human nature. What began as a way to protect dynasties and ensure control over thrones ended in tragedy, leaving a legacy of broken families, weakened empires, and distorted histories. The consequences of these incestuous practices rippled through society, affecting not only the royal families, but also the stability of entire nations. These acts, driven by fear and obsession with bloodlines, ultimately led to the downfall of once mighty kingdoms. The lasting impact of royal incest serves as a stark warning. When the thirst for control becomes an obsession, it can lead to ruin, both for those in power and the generations that follow. History is dark, and we must remember it.